what it does, in brief, it highlights democratic authority, uses institutional mechanisms for citizens to realize their interests and rights, offers opportunities for negotiating mutual differences. And the next set of requirements are very, very important for developing countries, because that's the area they have been working on: rule of law, equity, inclusiveness, consensus, responsiveness, accountability, and transparency. And these values are not treated in isolation. They are treated through, they are implemented through networks, through interaction, and procedures for conflict resolution. So there are a bunch of definitions, which I have tried to summarize here, and I will go through them quickly. The objective is simply to make it known how we get distracted by different approaches to definitions. So it is described as a way for organizing to make and implement decisions in a society. It is also described as a way for articulating interests, mediating differences, exercising legal rights. It draws upon all those mechanisms: democracy, networks, interaction, accountability, supported by rule of law, effectiveness, inclusiveness. So all these things are good because we know these are positive values. But even if we look at influential institutions' approach to governance, so World Bank comes up with the idea that it consists of the traditions and institutions by which authority in the country is exercised. Now, when we look at that view, it is hard to see how traditions and institutions which have not performed so far could be highlighted in the definition of the governance. But the good thing is we also talk about the process of selecting governments, monitoring them, replacing them, and the World Governance Index as 6 dimensions that talk about voice and accountability, that talk about rule of law, talk about control of corruption, talk about regulatory quality. But all of these are embedded in various definitions: respect of citizens and states for the institutions, capacity of governments to effectively formulate laws. 3 more definitions where Stoker talks about establish rules for community, make allocative decisions, settle conflicts over rules, mediate disputes. UNDP is slightly vague: exercise of a nation's political and administrative powers. And Institute of Governance is also pretty vague by saying it's the art of steering societies and organizations. So, looking at multiple interpretations, sometimes you think governance is about power and influence, who decides, how decision makers are held accountable, and by other definitions, it seems it's simply a set of conditions that exist in the country, or a series of actions by governments and societies. So patterns of relationships, and that's what got me confused. I tried to figure out, if we want to understand governance and establish governance, which of these aspects should be attended to, and they're not ordered in list of importance. So what happened is development governments raised hopes and expectations, and gradually it is being realized, and some developing countries are voicing out that they are not in a position to establish governance as it exists in many other countries. So it's not a matter of emulating. And more and more countries are putting emphasis on indigenous traditions and practices. In Canada, it's a big deal. For everything, we have to refer back to the indigenous practices. So the idea is societies cannot transform without destroying indigenous cultures and practices. And of course, the resources and expertise are another area of concern, because not all countries have the resources and expertise to deal with them. So why are these being applied? One reason is uncritical acceptance of concepts and strategies as defined by donors and the developed world. So that's where the aid comes from. And many countries, even with reluctance, accept these kinds of positions. So you have to have certain institutions that deal with these issues. A problem is there is no accommodation of indigenous traditions and values, and where external values are imposed on the system, it actually distorts the system and loses many of the merits of both the imposed system and the indigenous system. What's the result? There is an erosion of values because people are confused, and the advantage is obtained by a small group of elite who went from them. So when we look at these things, there are many people who have criticized development and governance by saying that, well, it originated in Western liberal democratic concepts. How can we have it in Hong Kong? There is a need to recognize the fundamental differences in developed and developing countries, identify and make use of traditions and practices, and what we need most is a serious review of purpose, the assumptions, the strategies, and the implications. I'm trying to rushing through it because I think I'm getting to the end of my time. So I get to the stage where I ask these questions that I have been trying to answer myself. And the questions arise from a review of the literature on development governance on how these things can be implemented. So our basic question is, what comes first? Do we go for development? Do we go for governance? Because currently, all these international institutions categorize countries. So they categorize countries in various ways. High income country, low income country, medium income countries is one way of categorizing them. It is hard to say if any country is fully developed because there are always problems in one way or another. So that's the question I will try to answer over the next 6 months. Do we go for development? Do we go for governance? And is there a sequence? What steps do we need to take? I remember in the earlier literature there was always 5 stages of development. So there is takeoff and growth, and eventually you reach the point of development. Are there steps like that? And the other point is, there are so many ways of achieving development. I mean, the East Asian tigers are an interesting example of how development may be possible by following specific steps. So let's go for economic growth. And once that happens, we can have social development, we can have political development, although I cannot say standing in this city that that has happened, although the economic development part has been completed decades ago. So is there one best way to establish development and governance? And the third part is, why have some countries performed better in establishing and sustaining development and governance? The answer might be in the nature of key institutions in the country. So if there are strong, effective political, social, economic institutions, they might be able to survive and sustain development and governance. Again, another question that I will be looking at. And then I look at all these league tables of countries that score high in the governance index, countries that are at the top of developed countries. Is there a method for measuring development and governance? What do we measure? Is it fair to measure all countries' progress with the same tool? Or should we have separate benchmarks for countries to be assessed against? And the I think the next question, I have an idea. Development and governance probably has resulted in improvement of living conditions for a large number of people, but they have not been able to prevent the rising disparities in different societies. So when opportunities come, there is some trickle-down effect. Some groups gain a lot more compared to the others. And finally, this is a question I'll probably never be able to answer. What are the implications for citizens as their life changed? I think citizens are probably enjoying a better life because of the general improvement, and whether it is a result of good governance, whether it is a result of us thriving private sector, whether it is a result of the resurgence of community care in a country, it will take some time to understand. So, very quickly, development and governance have not produced satisfactory results. Of course, it is always an ideal, which we will probably never be able to reach, but at least if we could see less suffering and less disparity in the system, I would say that. State and non-state actors initiated programs, but the success was limited due to a number of reasons. So many developing countries have unstable political systems, or too stable, where a dictator runs a country for decades. Economy, which is easily affected by variations in the world situation. Bureaucratic obstacles, that's an area I have studied quite carefully, and I can tell that there is strong bureaucratic resistance to most reforms which actually make these countries suffer. And of course, the interest groups in any country are so powerful that they are able to establish links with the ruling elite and move policies towards their interest. So modest improvements resulted from progress in technology and knowledge. But I believe human effort was the most powerful driver that allowed countries to move forward, although in terms of definitions of development and government, they're still not there. So I would like to stop here. Thank you very much for your patience. Please wake up.
Thank you very much. It's true, we didn't have many talks like this at a conceptual level, but I enjoyed it hugely, and I think it's a really important part of what we're trying to do as social policy researchers as well. And thank you also for keeping so well in time, which actually means we have an opportunity to ask questions for at least 5 minutes, maybe more if we need to. So who wants to go first?
Yeah, Joseph.
Yes, Prof, in your presentation, at the introductory parts, you made a statement that overall quality of life has declined. Well, what is the basis of that? When we think that if you look at the past, how people lived, and then we compare it to now, we may be tempted to believe that even in terms of improvement in health and a whole lot of things, we may conclude that quality of life has improved. But in your presentation, you said that overall it has declined. So what is the basis for that?
The basis, Joseph, is a number of new challenges that have come up. And if you remember Ray's presentation, the first choice, the most important thing for many citizens was air quality. Right? In Shenzhen, what you look for in a city is air quality. So those are the things that have actually made life worse. Of course, as I said, generally there has been some improvement, but the water issue is a major problem. Many people do not have access to safe water. The quality of air in most places is not the same. Poverty has diminished a little, but we still find areas where people are suffering because of lack of water, or in some countries too much water. And the new things, global warming and wars, have really caused havoc on people. So if you think of some of the war zones right now, people are really a lot worse than they were earlier. So those are the things that come to mind when we study development. Development should make us better people, better governments, better states, where those kinds of challenges would actually be addressed instead of making it worse. So that's the reason I thought quality of life has improved.
Follow up on that, if I may abuse my powers, Chair. To what extent do you think the academic question of development governance, to what extent do you think that maybe our methods are part of the problem? Because when you talked about the World Governance Index, it is so typical of us that we have this really complex issue, and we try to shoehorn it into an index and into a league table. And I did a lot of work myself on the limitation of regression analysis, because there's a very linear idea of causality. So is that maybe part of the answer, that we have to look for new ways to measure, to deal with causality, to really capture the complexity and the contextual factors that come into play?
Yeah, that's something I too had some concerns with, and the people, Gray and I can't remember the other person's name, they wrote several pieces defending their methodology. And then I looked at a number of other indices that look at different things. So African Development Bank looks at some things, and Asian Development Bank looks at other things. And then there are all these, the UNDP looks at other things. So I think that's where the issue is. And there should be a World Congress, all these index makers who should get together and decide what they should look at. But it's all so contextual. So when you look at the list by African Development Bank, they put an emphasis on law and justice, probably looking at the context. So I think the methodological issue is a big issue. I struggle with it, but I still think because the World Bank the index is so popular in most places, you put it up as the ultimate tool for measuring governance. But when you look at the items independently, you will see that for many years, in some of those dimensions, Hong Kong has scored much higher than UK. In terms of control of corruption, Hong Kong score is very high. In terms of rule of law, again, we have to say that here now, it has been high. So in many areas, they score very, very well. But when you put all of these things together, they always get very poor scores for voice and accountability. I don't know if people in the US have similar levels of voice and accountability, but it's definitely an issue. So I agree.
I guess there's one.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing. I think this is a very important topic. So first of all, I would like to know how do you define development and governance? And because both of them are very broad concepts, and different disciplines will use them very differently. So this is the first question. And then what are their relationships? So for example, development will enhance the governance, and governance will also have the impact on development. I think these are very broad questions. And second, regarding the research agenda, as it is shown in your PowerPoint, I think corruption is a very important topic. So, how do you put the corruption in their relationship? And second, as we may know, the big data now is very popular, and the public sector now use more and more the big data applications. So, yeah, again, how the big data could tap in this topic. Thank you, Pete.
Well, the definition of governance and development are so diverse. So you might see my co-author and I, we did coin a definition in 2012, which probably will be outdated anytime soon. So it's always an issue of contextualizing what we're looking at. So what development means in one country may not mean the same thing in another country, because some countries have progressed further in those development indices, while other countries are taking steps. Corruption is an issue, and as I said, there is the problem of getting data. I do look at the Transparency International's Corruption Index, but every time they publish it, certain governments speak up and say, oh, these are not true at all, they're all made up numbers. So again, as I said at the beginning, the challenge between selecting our data is a big issue. And finally, big data, I am still learning about it. I wish, and I have to strengthen my quantitative skills before I jump into that. But I'm sure big data has a major role to play in understanding social science issues. So thank you for raising those.
Is it a quick one?
I was going back to Joseph's comment about quality of life. And I was just thinking, isn't that maybe we see that quality of life going down because the public's or the citizens' perception of or their expectations of quality of life is changing, right? Because, for example, what you would expect to have a satisfactory life in 1960 is totally different now. Because now I'm not just looking at a place to live, I also want to have a fancy iPhone. So that sort of perception of what quality actually means that whatever measures of development or whatever measures of governance to achieve those development goals would always be shifting towards what people are expecting. And I think something like what is happening in Hong Kong now, tells you something of maybe perception changes and expectations in terms of how we ultimately measure what's quality of life is about. I don't know if you have a comment about it.
Well, my first comment is that's a very, very good point. And I vaguely mentioned in my presentation about how perceptions change. People's expectations were very modest at the beginning, now they are expecting higher things. So that from that point of view, they're probably less happy now because they do not have all the facilities that they want to have. And again, quality of life has also a number of indicators on which I think certain areas have progressed, but there are other areas where even the basic care, health, housing, safe water, clean air are still a distance deep. So I'll keep that in mind as I go along with this work and try to understand more about it. It's going to be a lifetime's work. Thanks, Heidi.
Yeah, thank you very much again, and thank you to the two speakers this morning. There's some quite different papers, quite different focus, different approaches, but both very, very stimulating and interesting. So just a quick round of applause again.